Sometimes, the game doesn't live up to the hype.
And this one was over before it started, folks.
But that doesn't mean there's nothing worth talking about.
They've still shot over 80% from the charity stripe.
One man embraces this moment.
You don't find this exciting, do me a favor, check your pulse.
Armed with the freedom to analyze, critique, and talk about anything.
What is the best sports movie of all time? I've decided.
Providing you the insight of game day, even if your team isn't playing.
Just a bit outside.
This is the Blowout Podcast with your host, Ty Schwartzlow.
You tried the corner and missed. Hello and welcome to the Blowout Podcast. On the road for the first time here with Scott Boras, and Scott has the home field advantage. Scott, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me for the discussion.
And we've got a number of different things that we'd like to talk about today. And the main thing, I think, is the college athletics debate, student-athlete compensation, however you want to put it. It has been in the forefront of certainly the media, and we had a discussion in a class, a little bit of an introduction for Mr. Boras, Dr. Boras, that is. He taught my fundamentals of interviewing class here at Winona State University, and I got to be honest, as far as things that directly applied to what I'm doing, at least in my work, you couldn't beat it. It was just in terms of things to pick up from. And while we get started, in terms of just interviewing and things that you teach students throughout this class, what's the one big downfall or big weakness that people may have, things that can easily be improved, just in terms of interviewing in that process?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge with interviewing is going into it knowing what you want to get out of it, and it's all about strategically planning. And a lot of people, I think don't, plan ahead or kind of anticipate everything that could go wrong or whatever. But I think going along with that too, you just kind of have to. There is a risk with interviewing too. So I think it's just a kind of general preparation and kind of basically the other part of that is just simply the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. So you don't need as much preparation the more you have that kind of experience behind you. So yeah.
And you have well, I don't know what other way to put this. You're a national champion in debate. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it's in public speaking. So
got it wrong.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, but for individual events, public speaking. So and that's just that kind of launched me into communication studies and doing teaching and public speaking specifically. So that's functional classes and related classes, interviewing becomes part of that and everything. So I mean, as far as what are the big challenges for interviewing, I kind of mentioned the preparation kind of stuff. It's general public speaking stuff. It just becomes an awareness of how communication functions, and then how you can control what you can control, and realizing that some things are just not in your control.
And I think there's going to be some people listening to the interview that are going to wonder, Scott Boras. No, not that Scott Boras. Could you clarify?
Parents named me Scott Boras, and there was an evil, maniacal sports agent of the same name. So
what is your opinion on the sports agent?
I think there's a need and a purpose for everything. He drives up salaries, and people don't like that and everything. I don't, it's baseball's kind of a tricky sport in many respects too. I think if you can, and we're going to be talking about compensation, so it's a matter of, for pro athletes, it's one thing depending on kind of what sport you're looking at. I think for something like baseball, you have a particular rare set of skills that allow you to perform at a particular level. However you want to think about the cutthroat aspect of contracts and contract negotiations, I mean, that is what it is. But at the same time, I look at something like the NFL, and basically these collisions and how brutal and violent it is. You would have to pay me a lot of money to basically put myself through a car accident every weekend. So I mean, in the sense of the pay, these pro sports brings in billions and billions of dollars. So like if the athletes are the draw, then pay them.
And I think that you touched on a very important thing as we transition into college athletics. And that is these college athletes, they're putting their bodies, they're putting their a ton of different things, not only their time, but you've got football players out here. How much is a concussion worth? Is that worth 4 years of tuition?
And this is where I'm from what I just said, I'm going to now contradict myself.
Go for it.
And say, it's really hard for me as an educator to talk about financial compensation when it comes to college athletics. It's one of those very tricky situations where no one comes. There is this constant search for equality, for fair compensation, but there's a lot of money and there's a lot of ethics that are butting heads. I don't know if I necessarily need to call it ethics or whatever, but like we're kind of defining what the purpose of education is, or not necessarily education, but the institutions that are housing these things. So the purpose of athletics, the purpose of sport, kind of gets lost in the greed, I think, in some ways, and it becomes a challenging dynamic. Part of the solution might be professional sports. What professional sports can do and what they can offer might be something there, which is where I think I get out of that contradiction a little bit in some respects. But it's difficult to kind of come down on one side too strongly one way or the other.
To me, the biggest issue that I have, the biggest red flag, I guess, in this issue is that you have the NCAA preaching this opportunity we're giving people who may not have had the chance otherwise to go get higher education, but then at the same time, it is contradicted with this nature of we're providing them the opportunity, but then we restrict. They have to spend X amount of hours practicing, X amount of hours worrying about their grades. They can't necessarily go do their job. I think of myself as a college football player, baseball player. I'm not going to have time to have my own podcast, and that's certainly going to help me as I go out into the real world.
Right.
What is the biggest red flag for you on this issue?
Well, I agreed. I mean, and the biggest greed right now, I think, in many respects, falls on the shoulders of the NCAA. And what they do, they make $6 billion a year in college athletics and everything, and how they're dispersing this money and how the flow of it and everything ends up becoming very unfair in those respects. But no matter how you slice it or no matter where you stack the cash, like someone's gonna walk away unhappy, I think, in some respects. If you just flat out say, all right, like everybody gets a piece of the pie, and then college athletics becomes about making money and branding yourself, education is the one that loses out. And that's what I'm more inclined to protect.
That, I think, sums it up very well, because I don't have an ideal solution to this issue. Yes, I'd like everyone to be treated fair, but at the same time, we've got to realize that some football teams make more money than some rowing teams, and there's just a lot of different finer points. How do we go about approaching an issue with this level of detail?
I think you got to start by looking at the litany of problems when it comes to what inequities are going on, and then start trying to sparse out what your particular options are. And I mean, as far as people who are saying, all right, let's pay athletes, but let's do it in a way that's fair. How do you do that? How do you practically do that? Because the reality of it is just simply that not all these institutions are created equally, and as far as just kind of the layered aspects of it, when you say we're going to pay athletes, functionally doing that, does that mean that every athlete, no matter what, is getting paid the same amount, depending on how much they put in as terms of the sacrifices you're talking about in terms of the sport versus pulling away from other places, holding a job, or your studies and things like that, of course, which are primarily important. But is the pay equal among sports? You've got the people talking about the men's basketball and men's football being the biggest revenue generators and everything, and then does that mean field hockey is getting an equal amount? And it brings in the Title IX issue and everything. Talent of players, should someone who is simply doesn't have to work at it, doesn't really need to lift a finger, they can show up and they're miraculous, do they deserve more money than someone who works hard, and maybe they get off the bench once or twice? So how that all practically plays itself out has to be figured out. fairness, I don't know if you're ever going to achieve that outside of the simple fact that Division I athletic programs lose money. You know, you're talking about, as far as kind of these mega money makers, they're somewhat few and far between when you look at the giant, huge picture of it. And when you are paying for the rowing team and for the field hockey team, you know, the athletic department is part of the school's budget. You know, meaning that they're spending on these types of things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that money's coming back in. So if you were to just say, all right, we're just gonna pay everyone from everything, there's no money. There's really no money there. You're talking about compensating people with particular skills at this point. So I've heard no, you know, in reading and whatever the experts are saying, and those who feel most strongly about paying them, I've yet to hear anyone actually come up with a way to do it that does end up with equality. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they want. You know, if it is a matter of kind of, I'm the best at it, so I should be paid accordingly, I bring in X amount of money and I should be compensated for that, then the field hockey team goes without.
I think what you need to throw in there too is these people that are advocating for compensation. Say Johnny Manziel, for example. Mm-hmm. You can't deny the amount of money that he brought in for Texas A&M football. Mm-hmm. You also can't deny the fact that he has a contract with McDonald's on commercials. Right. He's on the Cleveland Browns. He's doing just fine for money, right, and he doesn't have any student loans coming out. So it's hard for me to say that we should compensate athletes, especially when you consider it's not going to be distributed, right, most likely fairly.
Well, and that's just it too. There's a couple issues that highlights, and one of them is like, you know, is a better solution is leaving the money out of the hands of, you know, the institution. You know, like basically what it comes down to is scholarship reform in some respects, and then how much do you let kind of outsiders come in and brand a particular athlete. There's a couple implications of that in terms of the scholarship stuff. I think they've got it screwed up when it is the programs that have the 1 year renewable kind of grant stuff like that. You're looking at, you know, performance as a measure of whether or not this student keeps their scholarship or not. Offer them a 4-year scholarship, right? And when they enter into it, whatever, and they play for that, and if that's not good enough for them, leave.
To me, that's perfect. If you're Coach Nick Saban making $5 million, you better be able to know 4 years from now whether a player can play for you. And if you can't, that's your fault.
Right, and you honor your scholarship, you know, and instead of kind of treating them like the NCAA treats them like commodities. Absolutely. So it's like, so pay them. If you're going to treat them like that, then pay them. This is what I'm saying. I think the NCAA needs to reform a lot. As far as just kind of getting more on an equal playing field there. So I think scholarship reform is one thing. And another kind of aspect of that too is, again, kind of where does, you know, this, you know, if I'm McDonald's and I see a star athlete or whatever and I want to sponsor them, I want to pay them, whatever like that, I don't need the scholarship because McDonald's is cutting the check or whatever. You know, it's just difficult to see, like, you know, allow, again, as education, or the purpose of education becomes about branding in that sense too. But I think despite all of this, there is just a larger problem or implication with paying student athletes is just that just the fundamental backseat that education takes, which I think is already happening. Not paying them. And you look at programs like UConn, who has just a deplorable graduation rate, and there's a lot of, you know, Division I, you know, top 20 football teams that are barely graduating 60% of their team.
I'll give you an example. Northwestern University, a very good academic university, Pat Fitzgerald tells his players on the bus, usually about an hour and a half before they get to the stadium, be in your ready state of mind. I read an article even saying homework may even be discouraged. Football is more important than homework. At least it's been reinforced by coaches. It's not a good precedent to set, and I think it needs to change.
Yeah, it's the same thing too. Is like there is a tension there. I'm sympathetic. I think it needs to change too, because I'm an educator. I'm a sports fan, but I'm an educator. I'm gonna fall on the side of education being primarily important and everything like that too. And I mean, it's kind of the risk reward that you put the college athlete into. It's like, you know, like, how much do I spend worrying about, you know, my education versus putting into this sport with no compensation when I could blow out my knee and it's done. And I think the NCAA needs to be more responsible for putting in, safety measures, some assurance that, that there are some more safety nets for students who take that risk. We should encourage students to go to college. We should encourage them to go not to play and have your, pay someone under the table or have your tutors do your work for you, and then don't leave with a degree, and keep your finger. Maybe you'll make it to the pros, probably not, statistically not, but I think the NCAA has to step up to the plate and be more responsible as far as what they're doing with this money that they're bringing. They're making billions of dollars. Don't invest that back into sports. Invest that into education. And I'm clearly biased, but take that money and at least I'm saying that it should go into other things. We haven't talked about like the gendered aspects of all this too, and the promotion of female sports in relation to men's sports and stuff like that. So all the inequities that go on there, but provide health care, like long-term health care. If you got like a lot of money that we're talking about here,
and it's only going to continue to increase as these TV contracts.
If you have a student who can commit to playing for a program, fulfilling a basic set of requirements and obligations, and through some scholarship and everything like that, and yes, the tuition is incredibly high. So there is a form of payment going on here. But what are you doing with all this excess revenue? Cap the money that you're paying these coaches and it's not just coaches, it's the athletic directors, it's the administrators.
Well, there's an example of a wrestler
cashing in on all this. Take that away. Let if you're going to pay them that much, then let them go pro. And that's a way to have an equal or more level playing field. I know they want to attract them because they want to attract like the kind of play that you see at the pro level. But I think you're going to get that. Like I think if you just have to change the incentives in some ways, somehow like stop this just absolutely out of control, salaries for coaches and athletic directors from these big programs, whatever, and and it might be a different revenue stream. I can't say. I just know that the NCAA is making billions of dollars, and it's the schools paying them or whatever like that. But where the money is flowing here. But I want to see less investment into these personalities and more putting back into education. So, healthcare. If a student's going to commit and they're going to commit like 4 years and they're going to go long term and everything, then tell them that there is a basic level of added incentive, sports healthcare that they can access for however many years after they graduate or something like that. Or just better educate. Allow your school to hire more qualified people or people who can step in and ensure that these students, and not just your basic tutor who's going to like make sure that they show up to their classes and everything like that, but invest in kind of making sure that if it is a matter of kind of balancing time and balancing resources, find some people who can do that. It's tough, but
we've been talking about this issue for quite a while now. You can tell it's certainly a complex issue. However, the issue that I have is when you have the administrator, D1 programs are losing money, and just kind of put their head in the sand. At least let's take baby steps. I think that the whole food situation with Shabazz Napier, championship point guard after March Madness, came out and said he went to bed hungry. Well, in the next week, free food for college athletes. So they're certainly listening to the athletes, but it's not perfect, and I think we can both agree on that.
And people will abuse it. And that's the other thing too, is that and because it's about greed at the end of the day in a lot of ways too. And so I think if the NCAA is clearly being greedy on this particular issue in terms of my perspective and everything, and so the students are going to grasp for it wherever they can. You have the instances where is UCLA, right? The situation with the video games and everything. So using players' likenesses and selling the rights over to EA Sports, and now they're profiting off of, hey, that's me in that video game. You're not using my name, but that's me. That's my move. That's my face and everything like that.
My speed rating.
That's not that's not cool. You
No.
have to compensate that. I'm completely sympathetic to the student in that sense too. And like, the sales of jerseys and memorabilia and everything based on those athletes and everything. So I think, in those instances, there has to be some form. I feel that there can and should be, some form of compensation. I just think it has to be kind of very closely controlled and monitored. And if it's a situation where, it's difficult because you feel for that student and you feel for what they're putting out there and yet not getting anything in return. At the same time, at the very institution where that might be happening, the women's golf team might be getting cut. So where do you
Where do you put your pity?
If that money, if that money that student is bringing in because their jersey is selling is helping, it's all kind of no-win situation. No matter where you kind of look through it, it's a matter of, I think, kind of like bringing all these potential issues to the table and just trying to keep working, smoothing things out, and realizing that there is really no perfect solution here.
I've said it a couple of times, we're not experts. You certainly are more of an expert than I am, but the one thing I have seen, at least in my job, I've been to a ton of different practices, and whether it's women's basketball, men's basketball, whatever the sport may be, there's the same level of dedication, same level of energy. Football players aren't putting in any extra time. So to come and say that they should be more compensated possibly at the expense of some other programs, that sounds ludicrous, and it really undermines college athletics, does it not?
I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know if I think I agree with you to a point. You talk about, and I think it's partially that underdog mentality of just, what makes a champion. It's someone who's going to go the extra mile. It's someone who is going to work harder than everybody else, every other program. And maybe it's a team. It's not just one person doing that. So, I mean, but that is the reward. Don't do that. If there is these larger incentives of getting recognized or getting picked up or getting drafted or whatever, then that is in and amongst itself a reward. And that's a core argument too. It's like, what are these students being paid? Well, they're getting exposure. You have to work for it, and that's difficult when it comes to, oh, by the way, you have to maintain a GPA and you have to, do this, whatever. So it becomes, what is your big, now it's a matter of the students, basically against the wall with two issues here. It's a matter of kind of risk reward in terms of how hard do I push with no safety net here for me, in terms of risking my body and everything like that too. And how much do I push that to become a champion, to get recognized, to move on to that next level, and then sacrifice my other fallback, which is my education. And that's where, again, I think there needs to be scholarship reform as far as where these incentives how these incentives practically play themselves out. And then also some reform in terms of just this distribution of this massive accumulation of wealth that seems to be stuck, in these top programs and these top coaches and everything. So you do want to reward them, but at the same time, for the whole system to work here, it feels like something's got to give, or you're gonna lose more. So
we've, I think, covered just about everything. Dr. Boras, the final question I have is, I think we can both agree a decade from now the landscape of college athletics is going to be different. What do you anticipate that's going to look like 10 years from now?
I think you're going to see more and more. It's tough to say. I think you're going to see more and more the branding from outside interests and everything. I see education as, and this is kind of a larger kind of taking a step back as far as that's concerned. I just don't see education being very well funded. I think the out of control cost of tuition, the value of a college degree, of a 4-year degree and everything seems to be kind of up for debate as well. And again, I'm the biggest proponent that you should go. You have an opportunity, even if it means going into debt, you should do it. But there comes a breaking point where it's just you have to practically look at all these types of things. So I'm just kind of been seeing education take a hit in all different realms. So I mean, it's not uncommon, just institutions I've been at and some of the other tensions. And we talked about in the opening, the interviewing class, and one of the students, we did a kind of mock interview, persuasive interview in that class, and talked about kind of the corporate branding of public universities. The signage, we're sponsored by Subway, or like we're the Wells Fargo Winona State. It just, and I'm just picking those arbitrarily, but I'm just saying, there's money there. Mm-hmm. If we have something to offer as far as people are going to buy products and everything, then education is finding itself more and more in bed with product placement. And I don't think college athletics is immune to that. And
what is the cost we pay when that trade-off happens?
It's almost a whole nother podcast.
Okay.
To get into that.
Future, hey, no.
Yeah, but it's where it just becomes, again, you're in an institution that largely is, about higher order thinking, about like looking at the world, and especially from a communication perspective, is the way that we function and interact, and how we can practically, function and do good in the world and everything too. But then we lose our ability to critique when we so closely associate, when we kind of rely on special interests in those ways. And I don't think, again, I'm not saying that that's a horrible bad thing. I'm just saying that that's something that I think we're going more and more into, because that's where the money is that helps institutions.
Is that branding kind of happening with college athletics, that we have the football program paying for so many of to a certain extent? Is the athletics maybe not necessarily funding the education, but playing a little bit of a part? Or do you not see?
I don't know.
You don't make that same connection?
Well, no. I think we've been there for a while. The Tostitos Fiesta Bowl.
True story.
The I don't know. Meineke.
We don't need to give any more sponsors. If anybody wants to sponsor the Blowout,
but you see what I'm saying? Like we're already, it's so already branded on there. I mean, it's become second nature. We don't even think about it anymore. So I mean, that's what has happened, and that's what I think is going to continue to happen. And if as far as where revenue is generated from, and it's not going to, if nothing is going to change or whatever, then I think they're inclined to at least give us more, and it becomes about greed. And if it's a matter of sponsorship that's going to give you more, then they're just going to keep opening the doors to sponsorship. So how do you then pay college athletes? Through sponsorships. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but I would, as far as following trends, and you're saying like 10 years from now, that's what popped into my mind.
Okay. I think we can both agree it's far from a perfect system, far from a perfect solution, at least that we can think about. Let's talk about some Game of Thrones. I know, random thing, there's certainly some people watching the HBO series like myself.
I'm a pop culture fanatic, so I'm familiar, of course.
You're not up to speed. No spoilers. Like to make that perfectly clear, no spoilers. Mm-hmm. But I have not read the book, and we were talking about this before the show. If someone was intrigued by Game of Thrones but hadn't read the book, hadn't seen the series, which one would you recommend to them?
Well, I mean, I always like allowing your imagination to create it for you. I think George R.R. Martin has done an excellent job as far as building these worlds. It's very descriptive, so I mean, he's definitely painting a picture with his words, but for you to kind of conjure that up on your own is always a good thing. And I think they're both exceptional. So I would, of course, recommend the books, and I think everyone should. But I also think there might be a little bit of order to it. It's kind of, once you've seen the show and everything, your kind of perspective is already painted. It's already a little bit jaded, so it's hard to kind of imagine the book outside of the show. So I would recommend you do the books first, but if you haven't or whatever, that's still a great read.
All right, and New York sports fan, talk to me about your Rangers. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. Yeah.
Think this is the year?
Well, I mean, I'm not really worried about Montreal. I guess I think that's going to be a big, nice stepping stone and everything. I'm worried about the Blackhawks. So I don't know. I think it's going to be the Blackhawks. I think it's going to be the Rangers, and that's going to be one tough series.
Amazing
for the Rangers.
series.
But I don't know. I don't follow the West enough to say where the LA is at right now, so we'll see.
I just kind of hopped into this whole hockey thing. Growing up in Wisconsin, no professional team. This is the first year I've truly gotten into the NHL playoffs, and my goodness, was I missing out. So
it's fun. These games are incredible right now.
Really are.
All of them, they're going to overtime, 7-game series. Taking it to the extreme every time.
part that
I
impresses-
feel for the Wild. I feel for Minnesota Wild, but
the future is bright. I'm not a hockey expert, but they got some young talent. The thing that gets me though is the handshake after, the respect they have. You don't see it necessarily in every other sport, but really, it just as a newbie, I guess, to hockey is what stuck out.
hockey players are a special breed, and hockey fans are the most diehard, just amazingly, awesomely obnoxious people on the planet.
Well
I mean
said.
that is the biggest compliment in the world. I got my master's degree at Miami University of Ohio, and a big hockey school there too. And that's where I first started going to hockey games and getting into hockey. And what I've very quickly discovered, and I follow sports. I go to sports events as much as possible. That hockey fans are you'll never find a more hardcore bunch. They're great.
I've certainly learned that going to school in Minnesota, and this is what's called our walk-off question. I got to give you one question that you're not prepared for, you're not ready for.
Sure.
What is the worst post-game question that you have ever heard? Maybe not a post-game. What's the worst athletic question? Think like the Richard Sherman, Aaron Andrews interview. I have one in my mind. Worst interview question ever.
You mean like actual one or like?
Yes, a real interview question. I can give you my example if you'd like a second to think.
Yeah, give me yours.
So Patrick Kane against the Wild ended the series in overtime, game-winning goal, and there's a reporter who comes up. Patrick, was that your first overtime game-winner goal in the playoffs? And of course it wasn't. Stanley Cup, memorable ones. And watching the YouTube clip, and they show the question 3 times, and they show all 3 of his game-winning goals. So a very dumb question for an underprepared reporter. But as an expert, so to speak, in interviewing, do you ever watch some of the media and think?
I think the worst question, the worst post-game question you could ever ask is one that will elicit the response, "I'm going to Disney World." Little too obvious.
Yeah.
Put some thought into it. You just want to chat. What are you doing now? Dumb question. What do you think they're going to do?
All right, well,
They're going to celebrate.
we'll
That's a
wrap things
horrible
up
question.
with my dumbest question of all time. I will not share the place it happened, but it was after a basketball game. It was like a 20-point blowout, and I had to interview the losing coach. And there was a call he didn't exactly agree with. And being an 18-year-old, I tried to overthink it. And hey, I'm going to ask about that ref question.
Sure.
And ended up, you're trying to get me in trouble with the league. And who is your boss? And I'm calling him. Are you a journalism mate? And I learned you don't ask about the refs, especially not after a 20-point loss.
I don't know. I can't say that I'm that familiar with the etiquette, but I would have a hard time putting a muzzle on if I felt that passionate about a blown call too. I mean, you see plenty of them too, and you wanted that, but I don't know. Do refs usually get interviewed after?
No, this was a coach. This was a coach.
Oh, it's a coach.
This was a coach, and his problem was that
I thought you were talking about a ref.
by criticizing the refs, the league was going to get.
Oh, okay. You're trying to basically paint him in a corner to rip on the refs.
Well, I had the shot of him on camera, irate over the refs call, and that, no offense, was the highlight of the game.
No,
so.
that's the coaches. The coach needs to be professional.
No.
They need to be professional, and even if they get those types of tough questions, you deflect it.
That's I think what I learned. But as an 18-year-old kid, it's certainly
Sure.
A learning experience, I think, to say the least.
I think that's on the shoulders of the coach to be more professional and just do the whole no comment thing. And sometimes the no comment is the biggest comment you can ever give. Just by saying no comment. So. And
well, thank you, Dr. Boras. Anything? Anything else you want to plug or anything like that?
No, I just I think no matter what, when it comes the issue that we're talking about as far as paying college athletes and everything, it's like I said, it's a tough situation where again I just hope that a lot of people just kind of remember what college is for and everything, and no matter what too, it's a matter, you get angry at administration, you get angry at coaches, you get angry at players who complain or whatever, but it's still something we all love. So it's a matter of even, especially for the small schools and the smaller programs, to get out and support your teams, not just the big teams and not just when they're doing well, but let that be a regular activity for you. Find something that you enjoy and support it all the way.
All right, thank you for joining us for this edition of the Blowout Podcast. I am your host and producer, Ty Schwartzlow. Until next time, take care, and we will see you later.